This is the continuation of the review on Unit 5. So I believe the last video ended on question 12, so we'll start on question 13. So right now we're talking about our special right triangles. So our two special right triangles are 30, 60, 90 and 45, 45, 90. So let's look at the first one we have in 13. So in this problem, this is a 30, 60, 90 triangle, and I'm going to solve this using the ratios. So the ratios for a 30, 60, 90 triangle, 30, 60, 90. Under the 3 is at 1, under the 6 is the square root of 3, and under the 90 is a 2. Now I'm going to place what I know, which is this 10, and it is across from the 90. So I will put that under the 90, making a fraction with 2. Next, I'm going to find this side I have labeled x. X is across from the 30, so under the 30, I'm going to make a fraction with the 1. Now I'm going to take those two fractions and solve for x. So I set them equal. I'm going to kind of move down here for right now. So I have 1 over x is equal to 2 over 10. When I cross multiply, I have 2x is equal to 10. Divide both sides by 2, and I have x is equal to 5. So in your test, the problems will look like this. You will need to write the 5 in the box in the triangle. So now what I need to do is I need to find the other side. I'm going to label that side y. That side is across from the 60, so I find my 60 and I make a fraction with the square root of 3. Now at this point, I have two things that I can choose. However, I don't want to use this one because that would give me an x and a y, and I don't want to work with an x and a y. Instead, I'm going to use these two, and I'm going to set them equal. And after I set them equal, I am going to solve for y. So I have the square root of 3 over y is equal to 2 over 10. I cross multiply and get 2y is equal to 10 times the square root of 3. To get y by itself, I divide both sides by 2. That gives me y is equal to 5 square root of 3. Because this 2 is not under a square root, I divide it only into the 10. And 10 divided by 2 gives me the 5. And again, I need to fit that in my box. 5 square root 3. Moving on to number 14. So again, 14 is a special right triangle, and this triangle is a 30, 60, 90. So I start using my ratio, 30, 60, 90. Under the 30 is a 1, under the 60 is a square root of 3, and under the 90 is a 2. So again, I don't have any variables in this problem. I'm just going to label an x and a y. So let's say I call this side x. This 5 here was given to me, and it's across from the 30. So I go to my 30, and I make a fraction with the 1 that's underneath the 30. Next, I need to place my x. My x is across from the 60. So I go to my 60, and I place my x under the square root of 3 to make a fraction. I'm going to take these two fractions, and I'm going to solve for x. I cross multiply, and I get x is 5 times the square root of 3. Now, in this particular problem, we were given basically an answer bank. So we need to make sure that our answer is in there, and it is. So my x is right there. I'm going to fill it in the triangle. So that's 5 square root 3. From here, I also need to find the other side that's missing. I'm going to call this side y. Y is across from this missing angle, but I know if I have a 30-degree angle, I have a 60-degree angle. All the angles in a triangle add up to 180, which means this angle has to be 90. So my y goes underneath the 90, making a fraction with the 2. So again, when I look at what I have in here, I know I have to use the y. This one has to be used. I've got to use this one, but I do not want to use the one with the x when I'm trying to find y, which means I'm going to use the 1/5 again. So I have 1 over 5 is equal to 2 over y. I cross multiply, and I have y is equal to 10. So I go back to my triangle and I write 10 in the little space there by the triangle. Moving on to question 15. So in question 15, we have the same style. We have an answer bank, so to speak, and we have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So 45, 45, 90, and underneath is a 1, and a square root of 2. The first thing I'm going to do is place the number that I was given, and it's across from this blank angle. But again, all of the angles add to 180 in a triangle. So 45 plus 45 is 90. I subtract that from 180, and I get that this angle is also 90. So I go to my 90, and my 16 is going to make a fraction with the square root of 2. Now I need to find x. I'm going to call this side x. It doesn't really matter. And across from the x is a 45. So I find my 45, and I make a fraction with the 1. Now these two fractions I'm going to set equal. And then I'm going to cross multiply. So I have x times the square root of 2, which is silly, but that's exactly what I have, is equal to 16. Now to get x all the way by itself, I need to divide by the square root of 2. And when I do that, I get x is equal to 16 divided by the square root of 2. At this point, I look at my answer choices. So here my answer bank is, and I do not see this answer anywhere. So what I need to do is I need to make my answer look like one in the answer bank. So if I take 16 divided by the square root of 2 and I rationalize the denominator, that means I don't want a square root in the denominator anymore. But the only thing I can do is multiply by a 1, the number 1, but in a silly version. So I'm going to multiply by the square root of 2 over the square root of 2. That number is really just a 1. I can multiply any number by a 1, and it won't change the value. It might change the way it looks, but it's still the same number. And this gives me 16 square root of 2 on the bottom, and the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 4, which is the same as just 2. Now, once I have this, the 2 is not under a square root, the one that's on the bottom, so I can divide the 16 by 2. And when I take the 16 and divide by 2, that gives me 8. So this number is the same as 8 times the square root of 2. Now, the other thing that we can do is we can simply use our calculator. So if we wanted to, we could calculate the value of 16 divided by square root 2. When I calculate that on my calculator, I get 11.313. So I can also come over to my word bank, answer bank, and I can calculate each answer. This answer, 8 times the square root of 2, is actually the same. It's 11.313. Now, I could calculate all the other values, but this is the one that I'm looking for. So without rationalizing the denominator, I now know that x is 8 times the square root 2. Now at this point we have two options to solve for the other missing value. If you recognize that you have a 45, 45, 90 triangle, which is also the same as having an isosceles right triangle, then we know that two sides are equal. And if you recognize that, then you know that this is also 8 square root 2. And you'll notice there's two 8 square root 2's in our answer bank. The other thing that I can do is call this y, and it is across from the 45. I make a fraction under the other 45-degree angle. And then if I want to find y, I don't want to use the thing with the x. I have a 1 over y is equal to the square root of 2 over 16. Cross multiply. Y square root 2 is equal to 16. Divide by the square root of 2. And I get y is 16 divided by the square root of 2, which is what I just found, and I know that that is 8 times the square root of 2. Moving on to number 16. Again, we have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So we're going to start with our ratios. 45, 45, 90. Under the 45 is a 1, under the 45 is a 1, and under the 90 is a square root of 2. I'm going to place the 8 across from the 45. So I choose one of the 45s, and I make a fraction with the 1 under the 45. The next thing I want to do is label a missing side with an x, and x is across from this angle. In a triangle, all the angles add up to 180. And if I work that out, I'm going to get that this is 90 degrees. So my x is across from the 90. So I go to my ratios, and under the 90, I make a fraction with the square root of 2. At this point, I'm going to take these two fractions and set them equal to each other, and I cross multiply. And I get x is equal to 8 times the square root of 2. So I go to my answer bank. Here's my answer bank. And I make sure, do I have an 8 times the square root of 2? And I do. This is going to be my x. So I put that in my picture, 8 times the square root of 2. At this point, if you recognize that the 45, 45, 90 triangle is isosceles, then you know that these two sides are equal, which means the missing side is 8. If you did not recognize that, you would call this a y. Notice that it is across from the 45, so under the other 45, we make a fraction with the 1. And then I'm not going to use the x. I'm going to set these two equal. So I have 1 over y is equal to 1 over 8, and that gives me y is equal to 8. And that is in my answer bank. Moving on to 17. 17 is again a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So 45, 45, 90, and we set up our ratios. Under the 45 is a 1, under the 45 is a 1, under the 90 is a square root of 2. I'm first going to place the number I was given, which is a 5, and it's across from the 45. So I find one of the 45s, and I make a fraction with the 1 in my ratios. Now I need to decide what I'm going to find next. So I'm just going to call that side x. This side is across from this missing angle right here, and I know 45 plus 45 plus the missing angle has to equal 180, which means this missing angle is 90. So I go beneath the 90 as a square root of 2, and I make a fraction with the square root of 2. I'm going to take these two fractions and set them equal to each other. I cross multiply, and I get x is equal to 5 times the square root of 2. So I'm going to go back to my picture, and I'm going to put that this is 5 times the square root of 2, making sure that it is actually in my answer bank. Next, if you notice that this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle, that means it is isosceles, which means these two sides are equal, giving me a 5 here. If you did not recognize that, you would call this side y. The y is across from the 45. We go to the other 45, make a fraction with the 1, and we can set these two equal to each other. Sorry, that's supposed to be called y. I wrote down a 5. Make a fraction with these two values. 1 over y is equal to 1 over 5, and y is equal to 5. And again, that is in my answer bank, and that is my y. Number 18, we now have a 30, 60, 90 triangle. My 30, 60, 90 ratios are a 1 under the 30, a square root of 3 under the 60, and a 2 under the 90. I start with the number I was given. That was a 6. It's across from the 60. So I find my 60, and I make a fraction with the square root of 3. Next, I need to find a missing side. I'm going to go ahead and call this side x. This side is across from the 30. So I go to my 30, and I'm going to make a fraction with the x. I'm going to set these two fractions equal to each other. And once I've done that, I'm going to cross multiply. So x times the square root of 3 is equal to 6. To find x, I need to divide both sides by the square root of 3, and that gives me x is 6 divided by the square root of 3. When I go and look in the answer bank, I do not see that answer. So I have two choices. I can rationalize the denominator, Or I may use my calculator to find what x is equal to, and then find that answer in the answer bank. The first thing I'm going to do is rationalize. So I multiply by a silly version of the number 1, which does not change the value of the number. And by doing that, I choose whatever the denominator is with the square root to create this number 1. When I multiply this together, I get 6 square root of 3 on the top. On the bottom, I have the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, which is the same as the square root of 9. And the square root of 9 is 3. So my denominator is 3. From here, because the 3 on the bottom does not have a square root, I can divide it into the 6. And 6 divided by 3 is 2. So I end up with 2 times the square root of 3. So now I go to my answer bank, and do I have that? I do. My answer bank has got a 2 square root of 3, so I'm going to fill that in my triangle. From here, I need to find the other variable. Oh, I apologize. I was going to show you how to do that on the calculator as well. So if I have x is equal to 6 divided by square root of 3, I can pick up my calculator and figure out what that value is. And when I figure out that, I get the answer is 3.464. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for this number in my answer bank. And obviously 12 is not it. But if you type 2 times the square root of 3 on your calculator, you're going to get that this is the same as 3.464, meaning this is the same as this. Whichever way you find that is absolutely fine. Next, we need to find the other missing side, and it is y, and it's across from this missing angle. But again, all the angles in a triangle add up to 180, so if I work this out, I know that I get 90, so this is across from the 90. So I find my 90, and y makes a fraction with the 2. Now I don't want to deal with the x when I'm trying to find the y, so I'm going to set these two equal to each other. Cross multiply, and I get y times the square root of 3 is equal to 6 times 2, which is 12. To get y by itself, I divide both sides by the square root of 3, and I get y is equal to 12 divided by the square root of 3. So again, I don't have this answer in my answer bank. So I either pick up the calculator and work it out, or I rationalize. Now if I were to pick up the calculator, I get 12 divided by the square root of 3 on my calc, and I get 6.928. So that's what I would be looking for in my answer bank. I have already used this. 12 is not the same as 6.928. I tried the square root of 6 on my calculator, and the square root of 6 is 2.449. So that's not what I'm looking for. 6 times the square root of 2 gives me 8.485. That's not what I'm looking for. 6 times the square root of 3 is 6.928. That's what I'm looking for. So this should be my y value. Let's go ahead and rationalize. So the bottom is a square root of 3. So I multiply by a silly version of the number 1, which is the square root of 3, over the square root of 3. And that gives me 12 times the square root of 3 divided by the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 9, which is the same as 3. So that's my denominator. The 3 on the bottom does not have a square root, so I can divide that into the 12, and that gives me 4 times the square root of 3. So again, I know 4 times the square root of 3 is this side. Number 19. We have several problems involved in number 19. I'm going to start with the one on the top left. So right here, and again we have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So using our ratios, we have 45, 45, 90. Underneath the 45 is a 1, underneath the 45 is a 1, and underneath the 90 is a square root of 2. I'm first going to place the 10. The 10 is across from the 90, so under the 90, I make a fraction with the square root of 2. I'm going to call this side x, and this side is across from a 45, so under the 45, I'm going to make a fraction with the 1. I set these two fractions equal, and when I do, I get x times the square root of 2 is equal to 10. To get x all the way by itself, I need to divide both sides by the square root of 2, and my x is 10 divided by the square root of 2. There are other ways to write that. You may leave it like that, or if you rationalize the denominator, you will get the answer 5 times the square root of 2. Either answer is fine for this problem. Now at this point, if you recognize the triangle is 45, 45, 90, you'll notice it is isosceles. So for this side here, should be the same as the x we just found. So it's either 10 divided by the square root of 2, or you could have written 5 times the square root of 2. Either answer is fine. If you did not recognize that, then you need to place the y under the 45. Now we need to solve for y. I eliminate the x, I don't want to see it anymore, and then I write my fraction 1 over y equal to my fraction, square root of 2 over 10. I cross multiply. Y times the square root of 2 is equal to 10. Divide both sides by the square root of 2. And I get y is equal to 10 divided by the square root of 2, which is what I had found for x. I'm now moving on to the top right. This triangle is also a 45, 45, 90. So my ratio is 1, 1, square root 2. First thing I'm going to do is place my number. My number is across from the 45. So I'm going to use one of the 45s, and I'm going to place the 15 to make a fraction. Next, I need to choose a side to be x. I'm going to call this side x, and this side is across from the 90. So I take the 90, I put my x under the square root of 2. I'm going to take these two fractions, and I'm going to set them equal to each other, and solve for x. And I get x is equal to 15 times the square root of 2. And I'm going to place that into the box on the side of this triangle, 15 square root 2. Now, at this point, if you recognize, we have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. It's isosceles, and these two sides are equal, and you can write that this is just 15. If you did not notice that, then you would put a y here, which is across from the 45. So I use the other 45, and I make a fraction with the y. At this point, I'm not going to use the x fraction. I'm going to set these two equal to each other, and when I cross multiply, I get y is equal to 15. I am moving down to the second one on the left. This is a 45, 45, 90 triangle, and the ratio is 1, 1, square root 2. First thing I'm going to do is place the number that I was given. That was a 17, and it's across from the 45. So I choose one of the 45s, and I make a fraction with the 1. Now I need to call one of these sides an x. I'm going to go ahead and call this side an x. It's across from the 90. So I choose the 90, and under the square root of 2, I put an x. I'm going to set these two fractions equal. And when I cross multiply, I get x is equal to 17 square root 2. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in the picture. This empty box is 17 times the square root of 2. Now at this point, if you recognize that this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle, it is isosceles, and these two sides are equal, you can simply write the 17 right here. If you don't notice that, you would call this side y, across from the 45. I go to my 45, I make a fraction with the y. I no longer want to use the x, the fraction with the x, so I'm going to set these two fractions equal, and y times 1 is equal to 17 times 1, and y is 17. I'm now moving over to the second one on the right, and this triangle is a 30, 60, 90. So I start with my ratios, 30, 60, 90. Under the 30 is a 1, under the 60 is a square root of 3, and under the 90 is a 2. The first thing I'm going to do is place my number. My number is the square root of 3, which is across from the 60. I choose the 60, and I put a square root of 3 underneath the square root of 3. Next, I need to pick a side to call x. I'll go ahead and call this side x. This is across from the 30. So I go to my 30, and I make a fraction with the 1. I'm going to set these two fractions equal, and that gives me x times the square root of 3 is equal to square root of 3. And then to get x all the way by itself, I divide by the square root of 3. That may look silly, but it's just the number 1. Anything that makes a fraction, top and bottom, is the same number is a 1. So that tells me that x is a 1, and I can fill that in my diagram. Next, I have another side called y. Y is across from 90, and I go to the 90 and I make a fraction with the y. Now, I'm finding y, so I don't want to deal with the x, so I'm going to get that out of my diagram, and I'm going to cross multiply these two. So I have a square root of 3 times y is equal to 2 times the square root of 3. I divide both sides by the square root of 3 to get y all the way by itself. And when I do that, I get y is equal to 2. So I place that into my diagram. On to the next page. I'm continuing number 19. I am at the top left. I have a 30, 60, 90 triangle. So 30, 60, 90. My ratio under the 30 is a 1, under the 60 is a square root of 3, and under the 90 is a 2. First thing I'm going to do is place the number I have been given. It's across from the 90, so I go to my 90 and I make a fraction with the 2. And then I need to label one of the sides as x. I'll call this side x. It's across from the 30, so I go to my 30 and I make a fraction with the 1. I'm going to take these two fractions and set them equal to each other. So I have 1 over x is equal to 2 over 10. I cross multiply and I get 2x is equal to 10. I divide both sides by 2, and that gives me x is equal to 5. I place the 5 in the diagram in the box for that side. I have another side I need to find. I'm going to call that side y. Y is across from the angle that is 60. So I go to my 60 and I make a fraction with the y. Now that I'm finding the y, I don't want to have anything to do with the x. So I'm going to eliminate the x and I'm going to set these two equal to each other. When I cross multiply, I have 2y is equal to 10 square root 3. To get y all the way by itself, I divide both sides by 2. That gives me y is equal to 10 divided by 2 is 5 times the square root of 3. I go to my diagram and I put that in the box. I'm now at the top right. This is another 30, 60, 90 triangle. So I start with my ratio, 30, 60, 90. Under the 30 is a 1. Under the 60 is a square root of 3. Under the 90 is a 2. I start with the number that I've been given. It's across from the 30. So I go to my 30 and I make a fraction with the 1. Next, I need to call one of the sides x. I'm going to call this side x. X is across from the 60. I'm going to set these two fractions equal to each other and cross multiply. X is equal to 9 times the square root of 3. I'm going to place that in my diagram in the box where x is. Now I have another side I need to find, which is y. Y is across from the 90, so I'm going to place it underneath the 90, making a fraction with the 2. I have already found my x, so I'm going to eliminate that from my ratios. And now I have two fractions left. 1 over 9 will be equal to 2 over y. When I cross multiply, I get y is equal to 18. So I put that in my diagram. Number 20. For number 20, I don't know what I have going on. So let's read what we have. Given one side, that must be that, of the equilateral triangle. Equilateral triangle means all the sides are equal. This whole side is also 9. Find the length of the altitude. So I need to put an x somewhere in my picture, and I don't have that right now. The altitude is the height, which is this segment that goes from the top straight down to the bottom. Now, I still don't know much of what's going on. What I do know, though, is in an equilateral triangle, all of the angles are equal. Equilateral triangle means all the angles are also equal. If all the angles are equal, and they have to add up to 180, that means all of these angles have to be 60. Now, I am looking to use a right triangle, and I have a right triangle. My right triangle is right here. That's the triangle that I want to use. So, up at the very top, this angle is going to take 60, it's going to be cut in half, and that makes this angle 30. So what I'm going to do to help myself out is I'm going to draw just the highlighted triangle that I have all by itself. Now I know this is 90, this is 60, this is 30, and I know my 9 is right here. And again, my x is this. So now I have a 30, 60, 90 triangle. My ratio is 1 square root of 3, 2. I'm going to place my number first. That goes under the 90. So my 9 goes here. My x is across from the 60. So my x goes underneath the 60 under the square root of 3 to make a fraction. I take those, set them equal, and cross multiply. I have 2x is equal to 9 times the square root of 3. To get x all the way by itself, I divide both sides by 2, and you're welcome to leave your answer just like that. 9 divided by 2 times the square root of 3. You can also write that as 4.5 times the square root of 3 as well. Moving on to the problem at the right. So this is the same as the one that we just did, so we know some things already. We know that we have a 30, 60, 90 triangle, and we know we're trying to find the altitude, which is right here. So I'm going to draw that triangle out by itself. X is here, 30 is here, 8 is here, and 60 is here. Now we have a 30, 60, 90 triangle, so we use our ratios. We're going to first place the number. The number is across from the 90, so my 8 is going to go here. My x is across from the 60, so my x is going to make a fraction with the square root of 3. I'm going to set these two equal and cross multiply. I get 2x is equal to 8 times the square root of 3. I divide both sides by 2, and I can divide the 8 by 2, and that gives me 4, and the square root of 3 is still there. So my altitude is 4 times the square root of 3. Number 21. We now have a square. We know a couple things about a square. We know all the sides are equal. If these two sides are equal, we have a 90-degree angle right here. We have an isosceles triangle. That means these two angles have to be equal as well, making them a 45, 45-degree angles, and we have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. Now, I haven't labeled in my picture what I'm trying to find yet, so let's read the question. We need to find the length of the diagonal. The diagonal goes from corner to corner in the square. So there's my x. It's across from the 90. So I make a fraction with the square root of 3. My number was 17. It's across from the 45. So under the 45, I put a 17. I set these two equal to each other, and I get x is 17 times the square root of 3. Number 22, we have a 30, 60, 90 triangle. And again, we have an answer bank. So under my 30 is a 1, under my 60 is a square root of 3, and under my 90 is a 2. I'm first going to place my number. My number is across from this angle. I don't know it, but 30 plus 60 plus whatever that angle is has to add up to 180. If I work that out, that's going to give me 90. So my 14 is across from the 90. I'm going to place my 14 under the 2 to make a fraction. Next, I'm going to pick a side that I'm going to call x. X is across from the 60. So under the 60, I place my x. I set these two fractions equal, and I get 2x is equal to 14 times the square root of 3. From here, I divide both sides by 2, and I get x is equal to 14 divided by 2 is 7 times the square root of 3. So I go to my answer bank, and I find 7 times the square root of 3. That's my x. I'm going to place that on this side of the triangle. Next, I have another side that I want to find. I need to place a y in my figure for the other side I'm trying to find. It's across from the 30. So I find my 30 and I make a fraction with the y. Now to solve this, I don't want to use the fraction with an x. So I'm going to use the 1 over y equal to 2 over 14. I cross multiply and I get 2y is equal to 14. To get y by itself, I divide both sides by 2 and y is equal to 7. I go to my word bank and I find 7, and so I place that on the triangle. Next page. Number 23. So number 23, we have this triangle, and we have these three angles that we want to place somewhere. All we know is these sides. So what I know is this is the biggest side, and across from the biggest side, this has to be the biggest angle. So I come over here and I find the biggest angle. That's 70, which means this has to be the 70-degree angle. Next, I'm going to move to the middle side. When I move to the middle side is the 15 feet. So for the 15 feet, this is the middle side. Across from that will be the middle angle. The middle angle is 60 degrees, so I place my 60 here. At this point, I can be finished, and I know 50 is the only one left, but that's the smallest side, and it's got to be across from the smallest angle. Moving on to 24. We're listing the angles in order from greatest to least. So I want the biggest angle goes first. The biggest angle is across from the biggest side. Here's my biggest side. So across from that is the biggest angle. So angle 7 is the largest angle. Next, I need to find the middle side. The middle side is going to be 35. Across from that will be the middle angle, which is angle R. Finally, I need to find the smallest side. The smallest side is the 23.7, and across from the smallest side will be the smallest angle, and that's angle T. Number 25, we're listing the sides in order from greatest to least. So what I want to do is I want to find the greatest angle. So the greatest angle is right here. This is the biggest angle I have. Across from it is the biggest side. This side is called RT. So this is side RT. Next, I want to find the middle angle and find the middle side. The middle angle is R, and across from that will be the middle side, which is this side called ST. So ST is the middle side. Next, I want to find the smallest side. So I need to find the smallest angle. This is the smallest angle. Across from that will be the smallest side, and that side is called RS. Number 26. 26, we have three angles, and we are trying to list the sides of the angle, the sides of the triangles from largest to smallest. Well, the first thing I need to do is I need to figure out how big is each angle. I don't know that right now, but I know all the angles add up to 180. So I'm going to take my 4x plus 6 plus 2x minus 10 plus 3x plus 13 and set that equal to 180. This will allow me to find x. I have a total of 9x plus 9 is 180. I subtract 9 from both sides, and I get 9x is equal to 171. I divide both sides by 9, and when I divide by 9, I get x is equal to 19. Now that I have x is 19, I need to take the 19 and I need to replace my x right here. So on my calculator, I'm going to do 4 times 19 plus 6, and that's going to give me that angle J is 82 degrees. I move on to K, and again, I know x is 19. So on my calculator, I'm going to do 2 times 19 minus 10. That gives me 28 degrees. Moving on to L, I replace x with 19. On my calculator, I do 3 times 19 plus 13. That gives me 70 degrees for L. At this point, it's very important I draw a diagram. So I need to draw a triangle, and I'm going to label them with J, K, and L, and I'm going to fill in the angle measures that I just found. J is 82. I know that K is 28. And I know that L is 70. Now I need to actually reread the question and figure out what am I trying to do. I want to list the sides in order from largest to smallest. So I want the biggest side first, and then I want the middle side, and then I want the smallest side. So to find the biggest side, I need to find the biggest angle. So I start with the biggest angle, and across from the biggest angle is the biggest side. This side is called KL. To find the middle side, I need to find the middle angle. The middle angle is 70. Across from the 70 is JK. So that's my middle side. Then I need my smallest side, that's across from the smallest angle, and across from the smallest angle is JL. So here are the sides listed in order from largest to smallest.